Well, welcome to the Think Oral Health podcast, another exciting addition to our conversation with me, Maria Filipova, and Dr. Jonathan Levine. Hello, everyone, and hi, Jonathan.
Hello, Maria. Who do we have on for this episode?
We have a very exciting guest today, and he's different than most of our conversation partners today because he is an investor. He is a private equity investor with over 20 years of experience. And I'm excited because the topic of investing in oral health is getting some traction, but it's still what I consider an underappreciated opportunity under the radar for a lot of investors. And so I'm hoping that today we get to demystify the aura of myths like investing in dental is in its nascency. Investing in dental is only for select investors. Investing in dental is perhaps too risky. Investing in dental is too small. Investing in dental is just a phase. And today I'm hoping that we get to showcase an investor who has very much deep appreciation for healthcare, an investor who considers himself a healthcare investor who happens to invest in and evaluate oral health companies, an investor who really is on the side of the entrepreneurs.
Very much so. I was looking at Dai's background and, Harvard trained, brilliant MBA, but also spent time with dental clinics and, of course, in healthcare. So he has a very interesting insight, a lot more than I would say most private equity and venture and other investors in the importance of oral health as it relates to overall health. And when you have that insight, the technology that's coming out of the oral health and dental entrepreneurs, you just have such a better perspective. So I'm so interested to hear how he thinks about making the investment and what are his criteria for investments, because I know it's going to really be very, very insightful.
Yeah. I mean, there's so few investor operators, right? Investors who have built businesses, who understand what it takes to build a business. And frankly, a lot of entrepreneurs have probably given up on this unicorn idea that investors could be patient capital, right? Everybody thinks investors come in, especially late stage PE investors, from entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs tend to think that PE money comes in, try to squeeze in every drop of value out of the company and flip the company and exit.
Right.
And so I would want to know, what is patient capital, right? Is there such a thing as patient capital in dental? And where do entrepreneurs find it? Because that's what we all want, right? We want strategic.
Yeah, I must tell you, my experience is that the words patient and capital is an oxymoron and doesn't work together too well. So I'd really be curious as to hearing what Dai's approach is, and hopefully it will surprise me. But, for us, we have this podcast to really shine a light on all of these types of issues. We want to connect the dots with all of the stakeholders. And really, you're right. This is really one of the first time that we're bringing in the capital partner to have a successful business and to understand his thinking. And after this, we'll bring in more of the capital partners because it is a very important piece of the equation and the calculus.
And we want to see more of them in dental, right?
Yes,
there's just a handful of them right now. And we know that we still spend, it's $150 billion spending in oral health that we do every year.
Yeah.
There's a huge opportunity. And not even to mention the healthcare companies, every single company, and I keep saying this, and this is my probably most controversial opinion, every company in healthcare who is in chronic disease management should also be in oral health.
That's for sure.
There's not a single chronic disease condition that does not have connections to oral health, as you have so astutely and eloquently explained it to me and our listeners. And so that is my, intention and my belief and my hope that oral health is not this sidebar niche conversation, but it's a healthcare conversation.
It's coming. No, it's coming. When you have a convergence of good research, the science, new technology, and then invention, and if you look at what's happening in the dental practices and trends today, where it was adhesive dentistry, it was implantology, it was the digital workflow, and now you have a lot of this new science. One specifically is around sleep. And now how the dentists are becoming airway aware of the airway issues and how that relates to sleep. And sleep solutions, the most conservative and effective ones, are now coming out of the dental practice, working with their medical colleagues, as an example. So we think of all these things coming together, and we can see how important dentistry and oral health is within the healthcare continuum.
And now let's have the capital to fund it and make it happen.
Oh, right. Let's hear from Dai. All right, Maria. I look forward to this.
Let's get into it. Welcome, everyone. Another exciting episodes of the Think Oral Health podcast. As usual, I'm joined here by my partner in crime and co-host, Dr. Jonathan Levine. And boy, do we have an exciting episode for you today. I'm very excited to talk about a topic that is near and dear to both of us and everybody in the audience who is an entrepreneur, anybody who is building companies, scaling companies, selling companies is going to be finding this episode extremely interesting. With that, hello from myself, Maria Filipova, and hello from our co-host, Dr. Jonathan Levine. Hi, Jonathan. How are you doing today?
Doing great, Maria. And I have to tell you, super excited to have Dai on this podcast with us. I know we'll bring amazing insights into the investment world in early stage and more mature companies within healthcare. So excited to start diving in on some of these critical questions of how do we take these young companies and how do we amplify and help them grow through the proper advice and capital and consultation. So just so excited for our listeners to hear this side of the coin. There's such a great need to move the needle. For us, it's connecting the dots between oral health and overall health, breaking down silos, and really bringing it so that we can go upstream with our diagnostics and our treatment, and we really could move this whole, let's call it the Western medicine model of sickness, and approach it more from a wellness model and save billions of dollars while we do that. We've talked so much about this with other guests, and can't wait to ask Dai some of those critical questions.
Well, let's introduce our guest. First of all, maybe that's a good step. We have a seasoned, experienced investor joining us today for the conversation. Dai Feng is a co-founder and managing partner of CareCapital. For those of you who are not aware, CareCapital is one of the most prolific investors in dental innovation. They focus on digital dentistry. They focus on emerging markets, dental distribution, dental services, and professional training. They are a global fund, and they specialize in truly enabling dental entrepreneurs and investors to have the right guidance and resources to execute on big, bold, innovative strategies, including spreading U.S. dental care standards in emerging markets. I'm super excited to have Dai join us today, not only as the managing partner and the co-founder of CareCapital, but also he served as the partner at Warburg Pincus, one of the oldest venture firms in the U.S. with particularly strong presence in medical technology. And so Dai comes to us with great experience, not only in the U.S., but also in Asia, where he served for over a decade building all kinds of businesses, from cardiology devices to consumer health to plasma therapy to eye care, specialty care. So I couldn't be more excited to have Dai as a conversation partner with us today. So, Dai, welcome to the podcast. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you. It's really an honor to be here. And as usual, it's very exciting to, speak with you guys because of the energy you bring kind of to the conversation. Also, your thoughtfulness, both around the clinical side and the business side.
Thank you. Well, this is we can't really help it. There's no other way, neither for me nor Jonathan on this sense, because we always say that healthcare is personal, and the medical dental connection is. I've seen it in my own experience as a patient. Jonathan sees it every day in his practice. Um, Maybe Dai, let's start here. In your fund and your experience, you don't necessarily describe yourself as an oral health investor. You describe yourself as a healthcare investor. In fact, every deal, dental deal, oral health deal that comes across your desk, you compare it relative to the other deals, the multitude of deals across different healthcare sectors that you evaluate. And so from that lens, as a healthcare investor, why are you looking in oral health? What makes oral health attractive to a healthcare investor like yourself?
That's a really good question. And we do take that approach. We look at every oral care dentistry deal, compared to every other medical device and healthcare deal. So we think that's the only way to guarantee the deal quality and the investment quality. I think once we don't do that, it creates too much bias and kind of emotional sort of part of the investment decision. So we really like this type of objectivity and comparison. So all of the investments that we made in dentistry, now 40 some, were done because they stood apart as great investments and great businesses across all of investing, including healthcare. And compared to all the other healthcare deals, I would say, answering your question, why dentistry? I think dentistry is an area where the support of the professional community really matters, right? It's really the clinician preferences that really determines sort of how fast the technology is adopted, right? And what type of treatment that patients get. And we feel like the more we invest in dentistry, the more we feel like that we understand how to have that conversation, right? Mm-hmm. How to understand the decision makers' way of looking at new technologies, new products, new solutions. And I think that decision making is pretty consistent, also pretty stable across the years, both looking back 20 years and looking forward 20 years, right? And so that allows us to more accurately judge, the commercial viability or the commercial scale up of new technology and products. That would be the first topic. The second topic, I think, is, when we were investing in other medical areas, you have a short window to sort of evaluate a technology, right? Before it just gets too hot for sort of responsible investing.
Overcrowded market, yeah.
And overcrowded, and then the window's closed, right? I remember investing sort of neurovascular, right? That was about, there's 10 years of really difficult work. Nothing gets approved and nobody believes anything. There was, a few papers, and then within that 6-month and 12-month window, if you didn't invest in there, you better just move on, because the next 10 years, there won't be any opportunities either, right? So with these window-driven opportunities and also sort of innovation trends that are really, cliff-based and very, very wavy, right? It's really hard for us to build a truly deep relationship with the industry, right? And with the community, right? You kind of have to move on to the next investment opportunity, right?
That's right.
In some other medical area with some other community, right? I think with dentistry, you can almost observe a product and technology over 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, watch it scale up, see how it impacts patients, how it impacts society. And you always have opportunity to invest, right? So you can actually build a relationship with the industry, build a relationship with the key opinion leaders, build a relationship with the various organizations, and not have these window-based and cliff-based sort of investment opportunities. And that's what's attractive for us, right? Because, when you're able to create that relation with the community, you can consistently invest year after year, right? And you can follow technologies, can follow people, right? So as opposed to be driven by external, window and unpredictable events.
So are you saying that dental moves a little bit slower, and that's why you don't have those windows of pockets of where you have kind of the peaks and the valleys where you have no one's looking at it, and then once you have one success story in cardiovascular, everybody goes in. That herd mentality is less strong in dental at this stage because it's a little bit more of a under the radar field, if you will. And expert investors go in and look for opportunities there.
I would say that the financial payoff, right, of businesses are much more stable, right?
Mm.
And the way that businesses make profits, make revenue, the rollout of technologies, the obsolescence of technologies, right? It attracts long-term investors, right, who really want to be, but it's not like so large, right? For example, if you have a mRNA, right? Then you've got, everybody in the world from everybody in the world and everybody from every industry, right? Rush it in, right? Then this doesn't have that type of, crowding effect, right? Which crowds out kind of the really dedicated investors, right? It kind of moves more consistently. I wouldn't call it slowly. I would say it's more consistent. And that type of consistency in terms of business and industry growth attracts certain investors who are willing to spend time in it. And it may, actually, dissuade investors who, just want to make a killing, right? So
That's great. It's a very interesting perspective on investing and the types of investors who are well suited to invest in oral health and dental care, especially in this stage. We know that the overall investment dollars that go after oral health investing lags at least by 4 to 5 times investment dollars that go into digital health, especially relative to the percentage of overall spending that we spend on dental care versus medical care. And so we know there's some room for improvement, but we're hearing you say loud and clear is that the oral health space in terms of investing is not for everyone, and you still need to attract the right type of investor to go into it.
Yeah, I think the total dollars made in returns is perfectly fine, but one has to be ready to make that over time, right? As opposed to catching a window and just making it kind of, super killing within a short window. And so that's kind of the nature of it. Yeah.
The consistency and predictability. I want to ask this question for our listeners. What stage do you like to invest in of these companies? Where do you like to get in? And what is your key criteria that you really say, this is primary for me? Is it the CEO, the founder, the leadership? Is it the invention? Is it your insights? Is it gut, intuition? Take us down that road of, what do you feel for with your criteria?
Sure. Generally, we invest in Series B and afterwards, including buyouts, right, in oral care and dentistry. But in the areas that we know, for example, implants, orthodontics, imaging, periodontal care, we can also go to early stages because we understand it sort of how those products and technologies and how the customers think, right? But generally, I would say we prefer sort of Series B onwards.
Okay.
The second part of your question, Jonathan, do you mind just?
Yeah, your criteria. What's your primary
criteria, right?
The criteria of in going in with these investments, and also what you've learned over time with your criteria of, is it the founder and the CEO? Is it their leadership style? Is their ability to, have a breakthrough innovation that you believe it's going to have that kind of consistent, great result over time? What is that criteria for you?
First of all, I'll say what are not our criteria, right? People don't have to be a serial sort of entrepreneur, right? For us, that doesn't matter as much. Doesn't have to be a clinician, right? And some people prefer to only invest in non-clinicians in medical devices, and that's not one of our criteria either. That doesn't matter. I would say what is a criteria really is, I would say two things, right? One is customer intimacy, right?
Mm.
And I see a lot of executives sort of set a strategy and hire other people to execute, right? And that just doesn't work, right? If you look at any of these successful companies, they've changed their market positioning, pricing, selling points over the course of 7 or 8 years to really get it right. Maybe 3 to 5 years, maybe 7, 8 years, but it's almost never, like you can think what it is that customers want and sell it, right? So that customer intimacy is really important. And we see a lot of companies that professionalize too early, put a lot of layers of big name people between the founder and the customer. And that really doesn't make the company successful, although it may sort of generate revenue in the short term, right? So I would say, the number of layers that the founder is between the founder and the customers, right?
Mhm.
How much the time the founder spends with the customer, how much respect the founders have for the customers, and how much they, understand their customer base. Who are the customers that I want? Who are the customers maybe I'm not ready to deal with right now, right? That positioning of your technology and service, understanding the context at which your product and service. So I call all of that customer intimacy, right? And it sounds very complicated, but truly, if you spend a lot of time with different customers, it's just going to solve the problem, right? So I would say that's our first criteria for sort of dental technology investing. And I would say the second uh, just is a derivative of the first, which is, patience, right? And I think, I see a lot of dental entrepreneurs want to get in, really want to be the hotshot internet entrepreneur, wants to be the next unicorn. And honestly, that just doesn't work in dentistry, right? Because you really need to figure out the context of your product that works. You really need to understand the minutia of the customer needs, right? And people who are really great salespeople, raise a lot of money, tells a huge story, do a lot of marketing to the media, to the PR, to investors, may, get a lot of fundraising, get a lot of valuation. But ultimately, I think it's really the persistent entrepreneurs, right? Who understands that it takes time to get the product right, takes time to build the community of enthusiasts around the product, right? It takes time to really educate and train, right? It takes time to build trust around the product. I think those are the people that we really like. So it's really those two criteria.
Amazing.
Our marketing is not a substitute for a product or a value prop. You can't PR your way into a patient outcome, for
Exactly,
example.
especially because I think, what you see in medical devices, it's a rather commoditized kind of thing, right? Like if you reach this functionality, then you're golden, right? You can kind of execute, just hire somebody from Medtronic or something, right? But I think, with dentistry, right? I mean, getting the functional and quantitative criteria right, is only half the story. It's about understanding the context, understanding kind of the way that it's used, improving the user experience, improving the efficiency, the perceived clinical outcome and real clinical outcome. And that is much more complex than kind of simple quantitative measurement in other medical device areas, in my view. Right?
So do you think it's become easier, just to piggyback on that point, do you think with the recent industry trends where DSOs are proliferating and almost 30% of the dentists are participating in some form of a DSO in the industry, do you think that industry trend has made it easier or harder for startups, entrepreneurs to create that customer intimacy that you're describing?
Honestly, I think it's made it a little bit more easy to commercialize, right? Because if you work with DSOs who are, really advanced in thinking, like progressive, right? You can actually test out a model that otherwise in private clinics may not accept, right? So you actually get faster commercialization, especially if you're able to land, a few large accounts. But I think that concurrent with that, you have to be with kind of the individual doctors and spending time with the customers, right? Whether it's as part of the DSO or as private doctors. And if you don't spend that time, ultimately, the doctors are going to tell the DSO, look, it's not convenient for me. It's not efficient for me. I'm not going to use it. And 2 years down the road, the DSO might tell you, look, we can't get this thing sort of adopted across our organization, even though we thought that this is going to be, really useful theoretically, right? And, the DSO leadership are trying to do the right thing, right? Sometimes, it takes the company to really get the minutia right in terms of the doctor adoption, the doctor usage, right? So I think the DSOs are going to be helpful to the companies, but it's going to never replace the need to achieve that customer intimacy that truly great dental companies must do.
I love hearing you say this, for myself as a clinician, but as an entrepreneur and starting a couple different companies, the insights that I've always gained from my practice, I always call my practice the laboratory, because the feedback I get from the patient, whether it's a medical device or a formulation or it's a new flavor, it's so amazing because it literally allows you to live in a feedback loop, live in almost a focus group. And Maria, it's very interesting because yes, we have this great growth of DSOs. We still got 80% of the industry that is still clinician focused, and it's either individual or there is a great tendency for docs to come together, or even in the multi-specialty umbrella. And that feedback that you can get from the clinicians, I think, especially when you're developing this build, test, learn, agile innovation mindset of let's start, let's iterate, let's get that feedback, so that it would drive your go-to-market strategy, because your insights, right, are so much greater. And it's so great to hear you say that, Dai. And the other thing I love that you said is that the patience and the time is in your thinking to allow things to develop. Because if you don't allow things to develop, and so many, I think, investor and PE firms, they're pressured by the fact that they want things to move along, and there oftentimes can be a misalignment with the founder entrepreneur, because it does take time. It takes time to learn all these things and to move past some early failures. Really, the failures are the ability to take risk. So the big question I'll have for you is, how do you look when you invest in a company and you have a company that doesn't have that immediate win and has some headwinds and might need to create that iterative approach or even some pivoting? How do you look at that with your investments that you've done within all of healthcare? And how did you address those situations?
I would say that all of our companies do that, right?
Right.
All of our companies fail in terms of sort of how they think they define the product and how they think what the customer needs, and then kind of iterate to improve it. And all of our companies who iterate are able to iterate, right, in a really humble way, succeed with their products. And now the question is, does the company have the structure and the flexibility to iterate, right? Do shareholders, investors, and the board give them the flexibility and the room to iterate? And I think that, that's where we also try to be helpful to really let other investors know, and the boards that we attend, that we've got to allow the founders, the CEOs to iterate the products, right? And they're going to figure it out, because ultimately we invest in a really healthy mega trend, right? That's why we were hearing as investors, nobody is investing in an area that people think there's no growth, right? The fact that we are in these companies means the macro trends there, and it's just about getting kind of the interface right and the user profile right. And I think the companies that we own that make those iterations, where we have a bunch of really helpful shareholders and directors who can be supportive of those iterations, really work well.
Yeah. It's great.
What's your definition of patient capital, Dai? Because what you're describing is, the ideal investor. All of us building companies want investors who are helpful, who are paying attention to the business, who are reading the materials we're sending them in those board meetings, who are picking up the call when you call them on a Sunday at like 8 o'clock. So is that a traditional investor who is doing their job right, or is that unicorn investor, the patient capital investor who is not here for a quick turnaround and an exit in like 2 years?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that, it takes around, for all the companies that we've seen, if the CEO is really sort of customer intimate and really spends a lot of time, it takes about kind of 3 to 4 years, right, to really get the product right. And, and when you get the product right and you iterate, and when it goes up, right, from product technology perspective, strategics are willing to pay very high prices for it, even if you don't have the financial performance, because people know that you've got the product right, right? People are going to be saying it in the market. And then, for example, we just sold, one of our major holdings. It's a intraoral scanner company called Ally Star to Strawman, right? At a, really a valuation that I'm very happy with. That's unrelated to its financial performance, just because it was launched in Europe by one of another portfolio companies in a way, and then Strawman saw it and said, "Hey, this is a great product, right? People love it, even though it doesn't have kind of the underlying, performance yet, but strategists really appreciate that." And if you're not investing into a strategic sale, if you're investing into kind of growing the business as as eventually a commercialization platform as a public company, that's also fine, right? Because once you prove the product is right, you can bring second round or third round investors in, right, at a much higher valuation. It's going to be very clear to them, the customer feedback, right, and the customer take up, right? You can get some of your capital back. You can reinvest in the next round. So, and it doesn't take that long, right? I think 3 or 4 years to really get that product right, and then sort of growing over to a 5 to 6 year period makes a lot of sense, right? And even if you hold it for sort of 5 to 7 years, but it's a much better return, then it's also fine, right? And I think it's all consistent with the holding period of investors. I think they just get kind of nervous, right? They don't know if that product is going to be iterated, right? Because most medical devices, like if you don't get it right upon FDA approval, right? People are like, well, this doesn't work. But with dentistry, right? Sometimes it's like, it takes 3 years after FDA approval to really get the product, accepted and adopted and trained up. So I think that patience and, being more relaxed about the iteration, being less nervous, would help the whole investor community as well as the startup companies.
Yeah, that message goes for the investors and the LPs who are deciding to put money behind funds who are, equally exploring opportunities in oral health as well as healthcare.
Absolutely.
And we have a shared thesis here in this call, I think all of us, that if you are in healthcare and you're not exploring oral health opportunities, you're leaving money on the table. And I think that's critical to right now. It's great because the handful of investors who get it, they have a truly untapped opportunity to go after and get a competitive edge and differentiate, in your case, relative to other investors and other funds, perhaps even raising money right now. There's something that when we talk about patient capital and investors and the right profile of an investor to go into oral health, the undertone of what you were describing was also, if you are, I've always said, we always heard this saying, start with the end in mind. What does that mean when it comes to investing? Is that even at the beginning, when you're thinking about your investment thesis of should I invest in that company or not invest in that company, as an investor, think about where that company might exit. And how does that factor into your due diligence or the valuation you would offer that company? And you and I have had that conversation already, but I wanted to bring this up here to our listeners, because if you invest in a company or build a company, you still have to think about what are you building it towards as an exit. And if you're exiting to a strategic, you still might want to leave some room in the market for that strategic to take on the company and do something with it. Right? A lot of people make the mistake that they will go in and tap every single customer segment, every single market, and we'll grow it ourselves. And then, but where's the room for the strategic? And so tell us a little bit about your thought process about how soon, when you get involved with a company, do you start thinking about exit? And what are some of the best practices of people building businesses that they could embed as they're trying to do daily blocking and tackling? Think about, how do I build a business that is easy to acquire or poised to go for an IPO?
Right. I mean, we don't do a great job actually thinking about the exit enough. I've always told my partners and my team, well, trying to think about it a little bit more, because it does affect, for example, your strategy, right?
Yeah.
If you're working on a technology product, just making that work better, even with a, less scalable profile might make it very interesting for strategic. But if you're not aiming for strategic, you might want to diversify the revenues, right? Really build out the commercial platform. And a lot of this depends, I think, on, the founders of the company and the largest shareholders. So for us, we think about it kind of in a pretty agnostic way, right? It could be a independently public company, or it could be sold to a strategic. A lot of it depends on the preference of the founder, right? So I think this is something that really needs to be discussed with the founder. Do they want to sort of set the strategy and the business as as a product technology company, or do they want to really position the business as an independent listed entity, right? And different founders have different profiles. Some founders really want to build a team with a full commercial capability, right? And we kind of support them to do that. Some founders feel like they're really constrained on the commercial aspect and really just want to focus on the product and technology. In those cases, we say, well, you better be having conversations with kind of the strategics, in a couple of years, right? Just to make sure that they know what you're doing, right? And then start partnering people on the commercial approaches, right? So I think a lot of it really depends on the personality and the preference of the founders, and that actually is a big part. And if depending on the preference of the founder, then obviously we should work with them backwards, as you said, to identify what's kind of the right business strategy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's interesting, because what I'm hearing from this really great conversation is the ability to align early in the conversations of the investor group and the founder CEO with vision of, what is the timeline? What are you thinking? What's your expectations? Because it's a lot of that managing our own expectations. And exit strategy and working backwards from that is part and parcel of that conversation. If I have a PE that wants me to be exited in 3 to 5 years, and I'm thinking as an entrepreneur, this is going to take at least maybe 7 to 10, and I have to decide which investor group I'm going to go with, I have to understand, and it's really good for the listener entrepreneurs to understand this, because I've made this mistake in my past. You got to make sure you're aligned in what your vision is with all of those things: timeline, exit strategy, and to be honest, and to really be transparent with these different investor groups. How do you think about that, Dai? It seems to me that's what you eat, live, and breathe with the people you look to invest with.
Yeah, I think what you said is this conversation with the founder and other shareholders, right? To make sure that there's a really frank discourse and honest discussion about where people want to end up 3 to 5 years from now. Right. I think it's really important, right? I think it's really important. And it's not like it has to end up there, anybody's point of view. It's going to be a result of sort of how people think. Maybe people change over time, and right. Maybe, you think like me now, but maybe you don't think like me now, but maybe 2 years down the road, as you consider it, you think like me, right? And that happens a lot. So we typically just let our preferences known to, the largest shareholders as well as kind of the founder. And, we could change our view in 2 years and the other folks could change their view in 2 years, right? So I think just laying it out.
Right.
I think, the nice thing about dentistry is I feel like there's a strong intimacy everywhere, right? There's a real close relationship with founders, close relationship with board members, KOLs. People know that they're going to be in this industry forever together. We might be doing this 20 years from now, right? Three of us, very high probability, right? Kind of, so everybody here in this industry, whether it's investors, board members, or executives, know that it's a long game and you can't really escape from sort of, short-term actions. And that's what makes kind of honesty really important and actually pretty practical.
So have the conversation early and have it often.
That's right.
It sounds like that's what we're coming around to. Okay, so speaking of exits, all right. And speaking of putting people on the spot, because we love doing this. Let's do a quick round robin. Where do we think the next unicorn exit is going to come from in dentistry, in oral health? In the next, let's call it 3 years. Who's gonna? I mean, no names. We're not gonna. Well, okay. I'll start us since I started the question. It's only fair. I think someone is going to build or aggregate a platform that is AI-enabled chronic disease management platform that drives at clinical outcomes with oral health interventions. So being able to do all the costly, expensive diseases around cardiovascular, hypertension, diabetes, at risk, value-based type of care with oral health interventions, and supported by AI and technology enabled. Maybe it's not 3 years, maybe it's 5, but that's the unicorn I want to see.
Hopefully not 30.
Oh, right. Well, Dai said we'll be speaking in 20 years, so still we'll be here around 20 years from now, so hopefully not 30. Okay, that's my moonshot for dentistry.
Nice.
What do you guys think? And by the way, if somebody's already building the platform out there, let us know. We'll help. We'd like to. This is definitely it's going to make a big dent.
Sure, I can go second. I think Maria, what you're talking about is definitely going to be a product and technology trend, and more of it's going to be incorporated into, existing products and new products. It's absolutely going to be a product technology trend. I just don't know if there are, strategic buyers who are sort of progressive enough, right, to actually, change their existing business models to accommodate this new approach, right? Maybe on the services side, but I think there's a general conservatism on the product side from existing businesses. So I think all those things are going to be incorporated into new products and technologies. And I think even there could be an independent public company that capital markets like, right? Mm-hmm. I just don't know if it's something that strategics will like, which kind of goes to where I think it'll be. I think it'll be, I kind of really believe in that the commercialization platforms, right, that are currently in the market now and that are being in the market now, that customer intimacy and connection with doctors, right, will continue to be very valuable. And I think that it's going to be the companies who have very strong commercial, capabilities, who adopt new technologies or purchase new technologies, right?
Interesting.
And increase their market share, who is going to actually be the next unicorns as public companies or as independently valued.
So you think it's the last mile companies, so not necessarily the companies that develop the technology, but the companies that take a proven technology and are able to get it in the hands of dentists, DSOs, patients, those last mile intermediaries. You call it a commercial.
Yeah, I think so.
Interesting.
And that doesn't, that still means that we should invest in new product technology, but there has to be product technology with entrepreneur and the founder that can really get to the last mile, right? And if they can get to the last mile, they can build a lot of new technology and products on it, right? The commercialization capability and platform is invaluable. But ultimately, I think it's going to be the people who can really get to the last mile, who can really, have a rejuvenating community of customers, right, who are excited about the culture and the features, right, of their products. That's going to make the difference. I think product and technology companies that can't get to that last mile, right, is ultimately going to be, incorporated into the companies that can, right, as product features or partners. And I think that ultimately those, the commercialization capability is going to be the determinant of, a very large value of the business.
Nice.
Hold on.
I want to go in a completely different direction because I love where you two went. I'm going to go to the service side of the industry. I'm going to look at the DSOs, and as we all know, how meteoric that rise is right now and why it's really addressing a number of the pain points of the young dentist getting out of school with so much debt and the need to coalesce the thinking at a much higher level for this fragmented industry of dentistry. So more of a business approach, but the successful ones that are doing such a good job on the clinical and the operational excellence side. So I'm going to go to the area where I think there's a white space in the DSOs, which is the multi-specialty dental practice and the ability to have a much more collaborative diagnostic, and because of the new technology, to have the capital like a DSO. It could be a DSO with multi-specialty focus or multi-specialty practices that utilize technology in that platform. And so it's a bit of an innovative business model. And I can see that those type of practices and a DSO that has that as a strategy could be a nice little unicorn. Absolutely.
That's right.
Okay.
We didn't. That's and for those of our listeners who have ideas, please send them in the comments and reach out, because neither of us went down the path of, in healthcare we know $1 trillion is spent on the admin side, and so automating and eliminating processes, paperwork, administrative is still a much sorely needed solution. And so if anybody's out there looking, you didn't talk about the admin side, the payment side, 100%, if you are in that space, or if you're in fintech and you think your solution applies to healthcare or dentistry, make sure that you give it a try. That said, though, dentistry is very, very different than healthcare. And as we know, the universe and the dental space is filled with healthcare companies and healthcare execs who thought that because they know healthcare, they now know dental. It's a little bit different. It's a very welcoming and friendly field, but it's very specific, and it comes with its own peculiarities, if you will. So
I think the software companies are going to do well, right? They have the last mile. They have the ability to sort of expand their functionalities and really, help the customers realize those administrative efficiencies that you talked about, as well as a lot of the needs of the organizations, right? To better manage, right, the case, the patients, and the whole administrative process, and, doctors. So I think the software companies are actually going to do quite well.
Yeah. And would you change your answer, Dai, based on geography, US versus global? You've made over 40 deals in oral health globally. Your purview is truly unique, and you go very broad, but also very deep in each of the countries. So would you change your answer globally versus US?
Yes, of course. For example, I think software is, less of an investment thesis for us outside of the US, right? It's more of a US investment thesis just because of the size of the market, right? Whereas you go to software into any other country, it's kind of, one single regulatory structure, different user behaviors. It's a small asset business. It's hard to scale, right? And then when we think about sort of a lot of medical devices, right, we feel like Europe is particularly clinically driven, right? So I think, you know, um, very very strong KOLs who are extremely passionate about clinical outcomes. So I think, Europe is going to be driving sort of a lot of the, I think, advanced, clinical advancements, right? US, for example, drives a lot of the operational advancements in terms of efficiency, right? So that's going to be a very large difference. US population, for example, is very much educated by the medical side and robotics, right?
Mhm.
So there's a general sort of patient, I would say, comfort, right, with robotic assisted surgery. There hasn't been that type of marketing anywhere else in the world around robotics, right, in the medical field. So robotics is going to be slower to take up anywhere else in the world. A lot of places in the world are value driven, affordable care driven, right? US prices are still pretty high compared to the rest of the world, but a lot of places are affordability driven. So, affordable solutions with simplified protocols, training are going to do very well. So, for example, we're very invested in the Brazilian orthodontics market, right? And all of our orthodontic businesses around the world keep learning from a Brazilian business about, manufacturing efficiency, training efficiency, sales efficiency, right? So, it's probably one of the most efficient markets in the world, about, how to train and sell to a huge group of clinicians, right? So I think definitely very, very different around the world. It's kind of the pocket of US, Western Western Europe. Then you've got the pocket of, I think Germany is very unique in Western Europe. And then you've got the whole sort of Eastern Europe, right, which is very fast growing. Then you have China, which is one of the largest dental markets with, its own unique, unique growth profiles and needs. China, after the volume-based purchasing, has suddenly become the largest market globally for some of the biggest implant companies in the world, right? And then you have Japan, which is a very unique market for brands and for pricing, right? Australia is much more like the US. And South American growth is really strong as well. So it's really interesting if you spend some time outside of the US in dentistry. Everybody's on Facebook, Instagram, or whatnot, and everybody knows what living healthy means. Everybody knows what looking good means. Everybody knows what smiling well means, right? So everybody really wants to get to the same spot all over the world for the first time. I think oral health, needs and standards are kind of pretty uniform around the world in terms of where people want to get to, but they have a much lower starting position. So that makes, I think, global investing and involvement really, really interesting.
Yeah, because you could leapfrog. You don't have to catch up. You could leapfrog to where you need to be when you're starting with that.
Exactly.
I'm very grateful for the conversation. I love the deep thinking that obviously you have put into some of those investment theses. So on that point, and maybe as we are wrapping up, Dai, from your experience in globally, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs who are just building a company and trying to scale it? In the US, or even perhaps what they could learn from their global counterparts. So what's your parting words of wisdom for entrepreneurs?
I think it's two words. One is, customer intimacy, and second is patience in terms of iterating the business and the product. That would almost certainly make dental businesses successful. Whether it's super successful is going to depend on where you are in the product, but just those two things typically make a pretty, healthy dental startup business.
Stick to the basics, to the fundamentals. You'll never steer you wrong.
That's right.
That's right. Well, we're very grateful that you joined us for the conversation. We are looking forward to continuing the conversation and inviting you back. Congratulations on the recent transaction and the successful exit. And where could, if entrepreneurs or our listeners want to learn more or stay in touch, what's a good way for them to get involved and learn more about you and your work?
I'm on LinkedIn. So, when dental industry people add me on LinkedIn, I usually just click accept, and I, enjoy having conversations. I'm part of this community now, and I'll be part of this community 20 years from now.
Yeah. All right. Easy to find you. Great. Well, thank you for joining us, Jonathan.
Oh, amazing. Dai, thank you so much. Your insights are really fantastic. And this is a nice platform for people who are entrepreneurially thinking, for people who are running their businesses, both from the clinician side and also from an entrepreneurial side, to understand your thinking, the group of investors, of how you think, the notion of patience and understanding your customer, that customer intimacy that Noel Taichi and Ram Charan talked about 25 years ago, how still relevant it is today. I'm a big fan of that. I was back then and I still am. So very much aligned with you on that, and so enjoyable to hear your insights. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks,
Thanks, guys, for creating this platform to get, the conversation going. It's really great. Thanks.